Welcome to this week's post-cabinet media conference. I have with me my colleague, the Honourable Minister of Finance, this week. I would like to just start with a very short announcement and then pass it over to the Minister of Finance. The Cabinet has today agreed to and confirmed that the public holiday for celebration and recognition of Eid Ul Fitr would be on Monday, the 26th of June. This is based, of course, on advice from the relevant Islamic bodies who have suggested this date as being the date that we should recognize Eid, and in fact, Cabinet have accepted their recommendation. So the 26th of June, Monday the 26th of June, will be a public holiday, as we, being a multicultural society in Trinidad and Tobago, will celebrate with our Muslim brothers and sisters and in recognition of Eid Ul Fitr. I'll now pass over to the Honourable Minister of Finance.
Good afternoon, members of the media. Always a pleasure to meet and speak to the media. I will answer any questions anybody may have that I legally advised to answer with respect to the property tax. And I would also like to announce that as part of the financing of the 2017 budget, the 2017 budget is a deficit budget, as has been the case for many years. The projected deficit for this year is of the order of 6 billion Trinidad dollars, and we had indicated this would be financed by a program of borrowing on the local market, an application to the Andean Bank, also known as CAF or CAF, for a policy loan of approximately $300 million or just over $2 billion, and drawdowns from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. So over the last 6 months, as part of the financing of the $6 billion deficit in this year's budget, the government has been going to the local market in tranches of just about $1 billion at a time to raise financing from local financial institutions. We have just completed the final tranche of that borrowing, because the way it's broken down is that we're borrowing $3 billion on the local market, approximately $2 billion from the Andean Bank, and the remainder would have come from the drawdown from the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. And we've just completed the third tranche of $1 billion that was put out into the local market. Bids were invited from local financial institutions such as Republic Bank, Answer Bank, First Citizens, FCIB, etc. And Republic Bank has won the mandate for this last tranche, which is $1 billion. We've got a good rate, 4.25% over 15 years, which is a better rate than we got earlier in the year. You may recall earlier in the year when we went out for a $1 billion financing through the central bank, the interest rate was closer to 4.5%. So the 4.25% $1 billion bond, 15-year bond from Republic Bank has come in at a good rate, and we will be proceeding with this financing from Republic Bank. And in addition, we're progressing smoothly to access the $300 million from the Andean Development Bank. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Imbert.
Let me say one more thing. All of this was planned. All of this was announced in the 2017 budget address and also in the 2017 budget debate. It was announced that we would be borrowing money from the local market. And this particular bond issue was oversubscribed. We got bids somewhere around $1.8 billion. So this bid round went quite well.
Thank you very much. I would also like to announce, you all would recall earlier in the year, the Honourable Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley, had informed the national community that he may have a number of official and state visits during the course of 2017. Dr. Rowley will be leading a delegation on an official visit to Chile, leaving very early on Sunday morning and returning on the night of next week, Wednesday. So I believe the dates are the 28th. We'll be leaving on this Sunday early in the morning and returning on Wednesday, which I believe is the 31st, if I remember our dates correctly, in the evening. The delegation would be comprised of the Honourable Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs, Senator Moses, the Honourable Minister of Trade, Senator Gopi Schoon, the Honourable Minister of Energy and Energy Industries, Senator Khan, and myself as the Minister in the Office of the Prime Minister, Minister in the Office of the Attorney General. And we will be proceeding to Chile at the invitation of the President of Chile to Dr. Rowley. And on the agenda would be a number of conversations with respect to energy-related matters. It may not be known, but Chile is currently the largest importer of Trinidadian LNG. So we will be pursuing those conversations as well as looking at some of their renewable energy projects. In addition to that, it's expected that the Honourable Prime Minister would be signing agreements with respect to the recognition of intellectual property between the government of Chile and the government of Trinidad and Tobago, and a number of other items related to trade matters and the building of the trade relationship between Trinidad and Tobago and Chile. We see Chile as being one of our South American partners that we need to broaden the scope and relationship between Trinidad and Tobago and Chile, because there are a number of mutually beneficial projects and matters that can be taken up by both countries. So it will be a 2-day official state visit, because on the Sunday and the return on Wednesday, the travel schedule is taking up the whole day. As I say, I think we're leaving at 6 o'clock on Sunday morning and not getting to Chile until 7:30 that night. And it's the same thing on our return on Wednesday. So the Prime Minister, the Honourable Prime Minister, will be leading a delegation for an official state visit to Chile, starting on Sunday and ending with our return next week, Wednesday. At this stage, we'll invite you all, you have Minister Imbert and myself, for a few minutes to take any questions you all may have.
Mr. Imbert, could you tell us how many people on a voluntary basis have submitted VRF forms, or VRFs rather, between the Monday, yes, the time of the judgment and
No, I'm not able to tell you that, but I can get that information and I can send out a press release informing you of those numbers.
How do you respond to the view that your most recent press release, which talks about the Ministry of no injunction has been granted restraining the staff of the Valuation Division from accepting and processing such forms and issuing receipts? There is a view that the word, particularly the words processing, somehow, well not somehow, the words processing veer into, I don't want to say contempt, but they cross the border of the order given by Justice Sifasad.
You work at the Express, right? Yes, I do. So the Express would have received a letter from our attorneys yesterday. Did you have sight of that letter?
I have sight of it.
Okay, so based on the advice from our attorneys, senior counsel, the press release was drafted, and our attorneys have since written the Express to advise the Express that the statements that your newspaper is making or are making are wrong and could create some issues within the public, that the government and the Minister of Finance is acting in contempt of court, and we have called on the Express to correct the incorrect information they've put in the system. Having done that, and having not yet received a response from the Express from the legal letter, I would not wish to continue this conversation on that topic. I will answer any other question.
But the issue seems to be an interpretation of the court order. I know that your attorneys would have said that it was very vague and it was uncertain when they appeared in court. But as of now, the public is still uncertain as to whether or not they should, because the opposition is saying one thing, the government is saying one thing, and there's no real interpretation of what was said.
All right, I think we better publish the letter we wrote to the Express yesterday for all media, but I'll just summarize. The press releases sent out by the Ministry of Finance were done on the advice of senior counsel. Senior counsel was present in court on both occasions, or participated in the High Court matter. I believe that was done by teleconference, video conference. And then senior counsel was present in the Court of Appeal, and senior counsel has advised and vetted the press release sent out by the Ministry of Finance. So the Minister of Finance is not acting on his own. He's not acting on his own intuition or his own feelings. The Minister of Finance is operating based on the advice of experienced senior counsel. And if you look at the press release sent out yesterday, senior counsel has advised, and I have acted on the advice of senior counsel, that there is no injunction against the Property Tax Act. There is no injunction against the Valuation of Land Act. There is no injunction against the voluntary submission by property owners of the forms, and there's no injunction against public servants from receiving the forms and processing the forms. And I act on advice, and I certainly can't debate in this press conference. I don't intend to debate the law. I don't intend to advise myself, and I don't intend to engage in legal arguments, because that would be a fatal error on my part. So I am not going to do that. Every press release we have sent out has not been whimsical. It has been carefully drafted, and it has been vetted and adjusted where appropriately by experienced senior counsel. And the ministry stands by those press releases. The press releases are self-explanatory.
That legal advice would be based on an interpretation of a court order, and there may be another attorney may interpret it differently.
What I am supposed to do as a responsible government minister. When I am faced with a situation of this nature, I am required as a responsible government minister to seek the advice of experienced senior counsel. I am not supposed to advise myself. I am not going to advise myself. I repeat, the ministry and the minister sought the advice of two very experienced senior counsel, and both senior counsel, the legal team, if I want to call it that, vetted and adjusted draft press releases and approved them for publication. Mr. Georges, you're trying to get me to do something that I said I would not do. I am not going to fall into the fatal error of debating legal arguments with you this afternoon. I will not do it. So please don't try to get me to debate legal matters in this forum, because I will not do it.
If I may just add to what Minister Imbert has quite clearly and with a level of clarity stated, the important points are that the government, through the Minister of Finance, has taken legal advice. He's acted on the legal advice, and our position as a government is this matter is currently before the courts, and that we should all sit and wait for the determination of the matter by the court. What has been published by the Minister of Finance on the advice and the vetting and approval of senior counsel is that a voluntary process can continue and nothing more. We are not going to be drawn into any interpretation of the court, in fact, interpretation of the law. In fact, that's the court's job. It's currently before the court. We have full faith in the judicial process, and we will await the outcome by the courts.
is before the court, wouldn't it have been in the best interest to ensure that there is no level of uncertainty or confusion in the minds of citizens, that the government itself hold off on,
Sit and wait.
on what
Mr. Georges, I will repeat. The press releases issued by the Ministry of Finance, you don't understand what I'm going to say because I haven't said it yet. The press releases issued by the Minister of Finance and the Ministry of Finance were published for the reason of giving clarity on certain issues. There was some confusion as to whether people should not submit forms. There was confusion as to whether public servants should accept the forms. There was confusion as to whether the entire Property Act's exercise had been halted. There was confusion as to whether the entire valuation of land exercise had been halted. There was confusion as to whether everything had come to a halt. And as a responsible minister, we sought the advice of senior counsel. Has everything come to a halt? And we were advised that the Property Tax Act, the Valuation of Land Act, the submission of forms on a voluntary basis, and the receipt and processing of these forms had not been injuncted or stayed by the court. And you can ask me that question 11 times, Mr. Georges. You will get the same answer. We acted on legal advice, and we thought, and we still think, that this was the proper thing to do because there is confusion in the public domain as to exactly what the current situation is. So the Ministry of Finance has provided clarity. Yes.
Do you believe
But-
employees
but-
are clear as well of what their role is?
Yes.
Why then there is no clarity in the press release on what people are to do about the June 5th date that you announced at the last postcard?
There's no need to say anything about that. There's no need for that. Because that matter's already been dealt with. There's no issue arising over any June 5th date. That has not been addressed anywhere in any forum. There's no issue with that, so you don't need to address it.
A deadline?
As I announced at the last press conference, we would request the Commissioner of Valuations to extend the date for submission of forms to the 5th of June. That request was made, and the Commissioner of Valuations extended the date, and that's it.
Not to honor that June 5th date on a voluntary basis. What happens?
Let me just assist here. As you just said, and you quite rightly pointed out, on a voluntary basis. So how can you not adhere to on a voluntary basis? By definition, voluntary means that you take your own personal decision.
Allow me to assist. If you had looked at some of the reports as to what occurred in the court, one of the attorneys for the other side said that the meaning of the decision of the judge was that people are not obligated. And he is correct. People are not obligated to submit forms. They're not obligated to submit forms today. They're not obligated to submit forms tomorrow. They're not obligated to submit them on the 4th of June, the 5th of June, the 6th of June, because when you say that someone is not obligated to do something, it means there are no conditions that have been prescribed with respect to that voluntary action on their part. So when Mr. Ramlogan said that his interpretation of what has occurred is that persons are not obligated to submit the forms by the 22nd of May or any other date, he, in my opinion, based on the advice I have received from senior counsel, was correct when he said that.
Whose advice did the valuations officers post these notices, basically telling people that they won't be accepting valuation return forms? There have been notices up until
You're trying to draw me, Mr. Georges, into a matter. Mr. Georges, you asked a question. May I answer the question? You are trying to draw me now into a matter that is sub judice, and I will not be drawn into that. Now, Mr. Georges, this is the second time I've told you I will not fall into that trap. Please do not try to draw me into a matter that is sub judice. Please do not do that.
Move on to the next question, please.
It's in line with that though. So people now are saying that there's no action going to be taken against you should you not file your forms. Does this
That matter is sub judice.
plans to implement this tax, and will the government now be deciding to put a pause on it until everything is cleared out, until the court case is done, and then move forward? Is there any plan?
The press release issued by the Ministry of Finance yesterday, it is self-explanatory that there is no injunction on the submission of forms on a voluntary basis. There is no injunction on the receipt and processing of forms. There is no injunction on the Property Tax Act, and there is no injunction on the Valuation of Land Act. That is self-explanatory.
But politically speaking, this makes the government look disorganized, and it seems to be falling apart, this pillar of...
I do not agree with you. The matter is sub judice, and we will await the decision of the Court of Appeal on this matter. I do not agree with your contention. All your words, I do not agree with them. Falling apart, I do not agree. We are doing our job. I do not agree with you.
All right, members of the media, you've heard clearly what has been stated. The matter is, and I must come in now on caution, the matter is currently before the court. We should await the court's interpretation and determination of the matters that are squarely before the court. That is not for either the Minister of Finance or any of us to do. So I'd ask that we move on with the line of questioning now. I think it's been completely exhausted.
Planning to take Minister to the Privileges Committee over statements made over...
Let us wait to see what the opposition does. The opposition always likes to blow a lot of steam. We will wait as a government to see what the opposition does, and we are prepared to deal with whatever they do.
Was there any discussion about Mr. Darren Smith's issue in the cabinet?
There was no discussion of Minister Smith's current position at cabinet here today. The position as set out by the Office of the Prime Minister yesterday continues to be the current position. The Honourable Prime Minister has asked for a report from Minister Smith. I believe a report has been submitted. The Honourable Prime Minister will look at the report and then take it from there.
The report was submitted today?
I believe it has been submitted.
Was any other minister, because there was a call for Minister Shamfa Kuju to submit a report to, was there anybody else?
I am not aware of there being any official call by the Prime Minister for Minister Shamfa Kujo to submit any report.
Mr. Imbert, as Minister of Finance, how do you respond to all of this? You are busy finding money wherever you can, including taxing property and so on. I mean, how you respond as the minister, and do you have any systems in the ministry to monitor this kind of spending so that the Ministry of Finance does not have to be putting out this kind of expenditure on ventures that may be...
Could you be more specific, please?
Does the Ministry of Finance have guidelines to permanent secretaries and so on to monitor spending and to keep some kind of rein on this kind of, waste, this kind of waste?
Okay.
The second part of the question is kind of straying into my good friend in the back there, where you're saying things that I don't want to associate myself with. But the first part of the question, the answer is yes, there are guidelines for the expenditure of public monies. And all permanent secretaries have guidelines. These would be contained in circulars issued by the Minister of Finance, the Budgets Division, PS Finance, etc. There are guidelines. All accounting officers, each ministry has an accounting officer, and every accounting officer would have guidelines within which they should operate. But the second part, I can't associate myself with your comments.
Okay, so guidelines speak to, if you have a delegation of 12 people going to something that is that part of the mix?
There are guidelines on the expenditure of public funds, the purposes for which public funds must be used, how public funds are to be spent, and so on. There are written guidelines.
Followed in your wise judgment?
I don't know what you're talking about.
Were those guidelines followed
With respect to what?
with respect to the Darren Smith?
That matter has not been drawn to the attention of the Minister of Finance yet. So I can't answer that question.
As I said a short while ago, the Honourable Prime Minister Dr. Rowley had requested a report on it. It is my understanding that a report was submitted, so we await the Prime Minister's perusal and decisions with respect to any such report. Next question, please.
Ministry, there's a report that an employee of the Ministry of Sport was transferred to the office of the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Can you confirm that?
I can't confirm that. In fact, I was just making inquiries before coming into this conference with respect to it, and my understanding, including conversations with the head of public service up to last night, is that there seems to be no merit to that whatsoever.
Any discussion about the CPL bid in Cabinet today?
There was no discussion about the CPL bid before Cabinet today, no.
What CPL bid are you talking about?
Supposedly there's $1 million bid to host matches.
What was the final?
Well, I can say that has not come to the attention of the Ministry of Finance. I think Minister Young is saying it hasn't come to the attention of the government. I'm not familiar with that.
The answer with respect to your specific question is no, that matter has not reached the cabinet level attention as yet. I did see reports suggesting that Ministry of Sport intends to put certain proposals before the cabinet, but I'm confirming now it has not reached the cabinet. Any other questions?
Minister Young, can you give us an update on the miscellaneous provisions marriage bill when it will come back to Parliament for consultations?
I saw that the Honourable Attorney General did address that earlier this week. My understanding is, yes, as you're aware, he had another round of public consultation. The matter has left the Senate and is now before the House of Representatives. So all that's left now is for us to put it on the agenda for debate, and I understand that should be happening within the next couple of weeks, where it will then be debated by the House of Representatives. There has, in between it leaving the Senate and arriving at the House of Representatives, been public consultation under the umbrella of the Attorney General.
About whether protocols were followed. At Cabinet today, did the Prime Minister issue any kind of warnings to ministers, seeing that this is the second instance within a week of alleged overspending or misspending? Did the Prime Minister issue any kind of warnings, whether formally, informally, about what happens from here on out?
First of all, Ms. Tate didn't refer to any protocol. She asked specifically about any policies with respect to spending by government, which the Minister of Finance answered. The answer is there was no specific conversation between the Prime Minister and the Cabinet today with respect to protocols, policies. The Prime Minister constantly tells us as ministers to just make sure that the proper guidelines, etc., are followed. So it was no different, but there was no specific conversation today with respect to it. I think I've made it very clear what the current position is, and we all await the Prime Minister studying a report and then him making any decisions he needs to make.
With respect to what?
Well, exactly what you asked Minister but a short while ago, whether there are guidelines in place with respect to expenditure of public funds. The answer to that is yes, there are such guidelines. Permanent secretaries would be aware of it.
What happened here and the trip coming up, can we expect to see the...
in light of what happened where? Coming up where?
With Minister Smith last week going to Tobago, and an official state visit coming up soon to Chile. Can we expect to see some kind of itinerary guest list, official guest list of who is going to this trip next week, so that we can match it with the people who actually do show up to show that it doesn't happen again? A level of accountability, we're asking.
First of all, I don't think there's an analogy between the two. This is an official visit to Chile at the invitation of the President of Chile. The head of the delegation is the Honourable Prime Minister. I have told you who are the ministers that would be accompanying the Prime Minister. In addition to the ministers who would be accompanying, there would be security personnel. There will also be the Prime Minister's press secretary, and then 2 communications officers accompanying him. Also joining us on this trip would be the ambassador for Chile, who is actually based in Brazil. That's Dr. Amory Brown. And then there is also the Prime Minister's protocol officer, who is a public servant and a senior public servant from the Ministry of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs.
And let me just come in here. Whenever there's official overseas travel, it is done by way of a cabinet note and a cabinet decision. A note will be submitted to cabinet, and the cabinet would consider the note and either approve it, amend it, or send it to a subcommittee, or ask that the note be withdrawn. That's what happens. And this particular travel of the Prime Minister was submitted to cabinet, was considered by cabinet, and was approved by cabinet. And the cabinet note would have had full particulars of all of the people who are traveling to Chile, and all the expenses associated with them, and sort of a summary of the agenda for this official state visit to Chile. So it's a completely different thing to any other issue that is being discussed. This is an official overseas visit which has been done in the correct manner, with a note to cabinet and detailed particulars of all the personnel and the expenses and the itinerary and all that sort of thing. So I just wanted to put that to rest. And I chaired the cabinet meeting that approved this trip to Chile, just for the record.
Sure.
Is there any cost, any estimated cost of it? And I have a follow-up also.
Difficult to give. At this time, we didn't walk with those details, but it's the normal rates, for airfare per diem and that sort of thing. But to give you a global figure, I can't give you right now.
What I can tell you in addition to that is there was an estimation of cost. It being an official state visit, the Chile has provided accommodation for the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Everyone else is at normal rates. I think we have time for 2 more questions.
There was also a thing of the Prime Minister being out of the country quite a lot. Like, I know he spent a week in New York, I think, for the daughter. And then, well, I mean, the opposition leader made a remark yesterday, stop vacationing and vacate. Is this like the combination of state visits and personal, is it too much traveling?
Obviously, our position is absolutely not. Unlike what may have happened in the past, you have seen the direct beneficial results of the Prime Minister's official travel away. I mean, we just recently came back from a very short, intense trip to Houston, where about $10 billion were committed to be investing in Trinidad and Tobago. I can't remember that ever happening under any state attendances by the former Prime Minister in 2010 to 2015. But in addition, the Prime Minister had declared to the country, I believe since late last year, that he had his daughter's graduation, and he did not intend to miss his daughter's graduation. And I think we as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago have absolutely no problem and actually encourage that type of visit and trip. And we are progressing with the business. It is the opposition's, they think it's their view to keep throwing out their opinions to the public of Trinidad and Tobago. And we as a government will just press on and do what we're doing. I've outlined to you some of the things, that the initiatives we'll be taking up on this visit to Chile, and I expect us to come back with some positive news for Trinidad and Tobago.
Just let me jump in here. I have looked at the itinerary, and it is a very demanding schedule. Prime Minister will be leaving at 6 a.m. in the morning on Sunday, taking a long journey through Panama to get to Chile, and leaving Chile at 5 a.m. on Wednesday morning to arrive back in Trinidad and Tobago after transiting through Panama City at approximately 20 to 5 in the evening on Wednesday. That is not a vacation. So the Prime Minister is leaving at 6 a.m. on Sunday, getting into Chile in the night after a long stopover in Panama City, and immediately into a rounds of meetings and official engagements and other bilateral discussions in the Monday and the Tuesday, and then leaving at 5 a.m. on Wednesday morning to come back to Trinidad. That, I want to repeat, that is not a vacation, and I reject the statements being made by the Leader of the Opposition.
I think the offer or the bid is for about $1 million US, right? Is that something government would seriously consider, considering the country's economic situation? And is it something that Minister Darrell Smith will lead, considering that he's now
anything that involves public expenditure will come under serious scrutiny at this point in time because of our economic situation. Okay? So anything like that would, as I said, it hasn't come formally to the cabinet, but anything like that would come under serious scrutiny.
Does the Prime Minister have confidence in Minister Smith should we decide to do that, to negotiate this deal?
You know, that's a question, as you say, does the Prime Minister, but I mean, these types of questions and leading questions and attempts are really not on. We've said what the position is. Let's wait for the Prime Minister to receive his report and make his decisions. With respect to the CPL, as the Minister has said, it has not come officially before Cabinet. I've just been informed that the Office of the Prime Minister will put out what the cost of the trip to Chile will be, and it has been brought down significantly. And I'd just like to add on a closing note that every single week before two committees of Cabinet, both the official Cabinet committee, the official Cabinet meeting on a Thursday, as well as the Finance and General Purposes Committee, we at the ministerial level who participate are shaving significant costs that are being brought forward before us. There's no cost that is just approved as a rubber stamp by this Cabinet, and we have saved tens, hundreds of millions of dollars. That is not an exaggeration since we've been in office by heavily interrogating the figures put forward to us in our Cabinet notes. Members of the media, I'd like to thank you all very much as usual for your participation this week, and do enjoy the rest of your day.